We are very, very fortunate to have a very timely topic today. And before I introduce George, I would like to say that the League has been involved in water issues, and particularly the water supply issues, since 2007. It's no wonder the public is confused. The issue is so incredibly complex, and there are a handful of people who are able and have been following this issue, and one of them is George Riley, who will introduce our speaker.
There's so much more going on, and so much is wrapped up in the details. But I'm real pleased to be able to introduce David Stoldt. He's the General Manager of the Water Management District. He's been here about 3 years. We are so extremely lucky to have somebody with his kind of background and talent. And he jumped in running. He didn't have any slow time in the beginning. But that's because not only of his background, but he's been on the Peninsula for a long time. On and off the Peninsula for a long time. But he has been involved in the Regional Desal Project. He was a consultant to the district. He's been involved with the Carmel River Dam investigations back in the 90s. He was a lead investment banker for the Pebble Beach Water Reclamation Project. That's the banking side, but also water. He's been involved with the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project, Barrow Valley Water Management Agency. He's been on the peninsula on and off for a long time. Now he's permanently here, or at least for a while he's permanent. But we're so extremely lucky. He's got his education out of the University of Illinois, UC Berkeley. He got a master's in science with the College Energy and Resource Management, and then Stanford University with a business management degree. He's been involved in every water issue that's going on. He's the only person, or this agency is the only agency involved in all of the projects that are considered a portfolio. Portfolio are 3 projects trying to solve the water problem. But he's involved in others as well. And he's had an enormously varied background, but also focused on investment banking, business startups, finance in general. He's decided to invest his time now, and where are my notes, in what I would call legal, organization, and political constraints and hurdles. There's nothing simple about this, and he brings a multitude of experience and very clearly, very clear vision about where he thinks things can go. We're very lucky to have him here. One thing I want to say that I don't know if he'll toot his own horn on this. In the projects going forward today, there's a piece of it called securitization. The district took the lead in trying to figure out a way to replace profit that CalAm takes, and kind of take it away from CalAm and replace it with public financing, which lowers the cost to us. Other people often take credit for this, but it was Dave who had the idea, did the analysis, did the proposal, did the writing, and did most of the talking. Some of the others are doing the talking and taking the credit. But David takes the credit for that, and I appreciate so much what he does with that. Anyway, I'm going to give you David Stoldt, our General Manager.
I'm going to survey a variety of topics related to water. I'm not going to reinvent much of the what is the portfolio of projects, what are we doing. Many of you in the room know that. For those of you who don't, you'll kind of pick it up as we go. But I wanted to actually start with drought, and then we'll get into the CalAm desal project, some new issues and ramifications. The Pure Water Monterey, or groundwater replenishment project. Talk a little bit about the looming cease and desist order. And we can't go to sleep on the Seaside Basin adjudication. There's impacts of that we need to talk about and be aware of. And then I'm more than happy to talk about any other projects or rebates or rationing or conservation or water waste, fines, penalties, all of that. So let's start with drought. I think you'll find it interesting. This is the U.S. drought monitor for the whole western states. Dark brown is what's called areas of exceptional drought. Exceptional is actually the worst category. And so you can see that the western states drought is basically centered on California. This is rainfall recorded at the San Clemente Dam, the purple being average rainfall and the blue being actual rainfall. So you can see our water years start in October, so we're not really following a calendar year. But you can see when we started off way below the averages, it was the worst first quarter in historical memory. So in January, we were very worried. We said, what's going to happen? What should we do? Should we invoke rationing? And we began to monitor on a monthly basis where we stood at each point in time. And in fact, this is rainfall on a cumulative basis, and the yellow line is the year-to-date through July. And you can see we started off in January being the very worst ever, worse than 1924, which was the previous worst. And then we reclaimed a little bit of ground, and now we're still right down there in the worst of the historical record, but better than the absolute worst. And this is unimpaired stream flow. This is how much water is coming down the river. And again, the purple is average and the blue is what we had this year. And you can see that rainfall doesn't necessarily translate to stream flow. In fact, we've been way off versus the averages in stream flow. And that means the aquifer under the river isn't recharging. And that's where about 70% of all the water that we drink comes from, is the Carmel Valley alluvial aquifer. This is the historical record for cumulative stream flow since 1902. And again, the yellow line is 2014 year to date. So we are below the average for critically dry. And these were the 10 worst first quarters. So all the way back in January, we said, well, give me the worst years you've ever seen, and let's figure out what happened to those. In other words, did we need to react in January, or did we have time to wait? And we did learn that of all the bad first quarters, a number of them returned to dry, below normal, or normal. And so that gave us hope. And that's why we went to a monitoring process. We checked for triggers, both how much storage is available and how much production is being done, to make sure we weren't overstepping our triggers that might invoke rationing. And we never did exceed a trigger that would cause rationing to click into place. The press always asked, well, how come Santa Cruz is rationing and you're not? And our response was, different conditions. They rely more on surface water, and surface reservoirs go dry much more quickly than groundwater basins, number one. And number two, we've been counting water for 20 years. We're much better at it. We know what we have. We know what we can do with it. So this is the drought monitor for California, the middle of July. And you can see the brown patch was centered on the San Joaquin Valley and the Central Coast. We were the worst of the drought. And here's the middle of August. So we've added Northern California, Central Valley. Also, going backwards, you can see Orange County and San Diego County aren't as stressed as we are. And it's even less stressful because Los Angeles County Metropolitan Water District, after the 1991 drought, the late 80s, early 90s, said never again. They had 20% mandatory rationing in Los Angeles, 20% voluntary rationing in San Diego. And they spent over almost $12 billion in storage. So they have plenty of water in storage right now that the drought is not really affecting them. So everybody's relying on El Nino, and I'm sure those of you who are well-read may have even seen this last weekend, yet another article saying it's going to be a flop, that we may be a little wetter than normal, but we're not going to get El Nino conditions with torrential rains that will replace everything. So what's happened during the drought is the governor issued an emergency declaration in January requesting everyone to cut 20% of their consumption. Didn't say 20% of what, relative to what, and kind of forgot that, in 2009, the legislature passed a 20 by 2020 assembly bill which said 20% reduction in water use by the year 2020. The Peninsula met that 20% reduction by 2011. We've already done a terrific job. We're really good at conserving water. And so when we issued the call for the 20% that you may have seen in your Cal-Am bills, we kind of hedged a little bit. We said the governor has issued a proclamation. He wants 20%. You've done a very good job. We've already met the 20 by 2020. But all for one for all, let's see if we can't do a little bit better. So we did not try to invoke mandatory 20% cutbacks here on the peninsula. Senate Bill 104 in March 1st brought drought relief, and a lot of this was aid to agricultural workers who were displaced by a lack of crops where land was being fallowed because of a lack of water. But it also included an order to take Proposition 84 monies, old water bond monies, and make them available for drought projects. We submitted an application for grants on that in July, and we're expecting to hear next week. The Central Coast only can get to maybe, I think it's about 16 million, and we put in a request for about $6 million worth of projects, ranging anywhere from the pilot plant for the Pure Water Monterey water recycling project to $1 million to invest in high-efficiency washing machines for multifamily dwelling units because they don't tend to invest on their own. So we'll see what happens. The governor formed a task force and then issued a proclamation saying all of California needs to conserve. We became part of that task force, the smallest water agency involved because of our experience with conservation. ACWA, the Association of California Water Agencies, created a drought task force, and the county created a drought task force between all of the agencies, both emergency services, water, and what have you, county-wide and then local agency-wide. And then in July, the state issued, for the first time ever, drought regulations that could have fines and penalties, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So it's been drought, everything. And we sit here and we're facing the potential for regulatory drought in 2017 that's completely different. But our sensitivities are heightened as a result of all this. And it changed the thinking of a lot of our partners across the lettuce curtain, if you will. By experiencing drought, we identified new waters that had just either gone out to the sea or had percolated into the ground. And we're actually running what's called a shunt test. We're relocating agricultural produce waters that are used to wash your lettuces. So when you get that nice little bag of 3 romaine heads, they've all been washed. And that wash water flows to industrial ponds near the Salinas River and is forgotten, either evaporates or percolates. Well, for the past growing season since spring, we've actually been diverting all of that water through the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project and delivering it to the farmers to help forestall their loss of water. So the state implemented new emergency regulations on water waste. And these included things like no use of potable water on driveways and sidewalks, no overwatering your landscape such that water would flow into the neighboring property or the street. You have to have a hose with a shutoff nozzle if you're doing anything. And if you have a water feature, you know, a fountain has to recirculate, which doesn't do much. All of these prohibitions we already had in place since 1998 here on the peninsula. That's our stage 1 water conservation and rationing plan. And in fact, our water waste rules are much more voluminous. You know, the cheerleaders can't have a car wash at the high school. You know, things like that have been banned for over 10 years. Of course, we have to, you know, call a high school counselor about once every 3 years and say, we saw you had a car wash. Don't do it again. But what the state did, which really got people thinking, is they allowed fines and penalties up to $500 per infraction. Santa Clara Valley Water District, which serves Silicon Valley, went out and hired 8 water inspectors to issue citations. City of Sacramento started issuing citations. We are prepared to issue citations. Ours is going to be educational first. The first offense is usually just it'll be a door hanger. It was observed that you have a broken sprinkler head, you should get it fixed. Or it was observed that you were watering between 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Can't do that. Yeah. But if there's chronic scofflaw type behavior, we will issue a first fine at $100, a second fine at $250, and a third at $500, and continuing to do so. So that's where I say we're here to help. We're not really trying to be in the infraction regulation business, but you will begin to see it. You'll also begin to see nice yard signs. It's like the political campaign is starting that will say, save water, go blue, and we're trying to heighten awareness over water use. City of Santa Cruz has yard signs. City of Ashland, Oregon has yard signs. Everyone's very sensitized right now. So you'll be seeing a lot of that kind of thing more publicly. But all of these regulations are on urban water users. Urban water use is only about 20% of the total water use in California. So we expect changes in behavior in terms of irrigation practices. There have been curtailments in terms of deliveries of water through the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. But the potential biggest bang for the buck lies outside of the urban core. So let's shift focus now and talk about the projects. For those of you who may not be aware, we have a portfolio of projects that are designed to replace unlawful diversions from the Carmel River, as well as the loss of some pumping from the Seaside Groundwater Basin. It includes a desalination facility owned and operated by California American Water. So all during the Measure O campaign, you'd see the commercial with the somewhat odd woman walking on the beach saying, solutions in sight. That's the solution that was in sight is the CalAm desal project. The second is the Pure Water Monterey groundwater replenishment project, advanced treatment of various waters, wastewaters. And then aquifer storage and recovery, which is take water off the river in the winter, put it up over the hill, put it in the ground, take it out in the summer when it's needed. But let's talk about CalAm desal. This project, we're going to start with the test well. So some of you are completely up to speed on this, but in order to move the project along, the project has design and environmental work taking place, but there's a separate test well that needs to be drilled, which will then prove how much water can be taken from the aquifer, what the volumes would be, what the water quality is, what the efficacy of drilling these kinds of wells are. And broken into 4 primary categories. CEQA, that's the environmental permitting work. That's the writing of the environmental impact statement, if there was one. In this case, they chose what's called a mitigated negative declaration to say there aren't substantial environmental impacts, so we don't need to do an environmental impact review. NEPA is the federal process, the same type of thing. Agreements and land, that's securing the rights to actually drill the well. And then construction. This timeline was just basically this summer through December, and the critical point was last week, a hearing at the city of Marina. Does everybody know what happened? Yeah, so they didn't get their approval, and so now their choices are appeal it to the California Coastal Commission, CCC. They had to go to the Coastal Commission anyway to get a coastal development permit. It would have been easier if they had approval from the city of Marina. But the Coastal Commission can overrule the local decision. There's some discussion whether the local coastal plan allows that or doesn't allow that. In talking to CalAm, their belief is that they can move forward with an appeal of the Coastal Commission, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen at the October meeting. The information right before lunch said it looks like it might be the November meeting. And if it's the November meeting, they may be able to begin construction or they may not. And it all depends on whether the Coastal Commission overrules the city of Marina. For the project as a whole, here we've got the EIR again, the test well, so that was all compressed in, that's what we just looked at. And then to actually build the production wells, they can only work in the winter. So this construction you see is only in the winter. That's when the snowy plover is not nesting. And so there's some room in here for this test well, and there's actually some room in here that you can maybe move some of these up. But this EIR, which is now set for approval in the third quarter of 2015, on August 11th was delayed to this date from 4 months earlier. So they just experienced a 4-month delay on top of a delay they got in January of this year, which was 7 months. So it's a total of an 11-month delay on the desalination project. All right, let's move on to the Pure Water Monterey, the groundwater replenishment project. Everyone's saying, how's that going? We hear that you don't have any of the source water. So what the Pure Water Monterey project is an advanced water recycling project that can take wastewater, the agricultural produce wash water I mentioned, storm water, drain water. So tile drain water that's spent irrigation water that goes into what's called the Blanco drain or the reclamation ditch. It can take all of these waters and treat them up to both potable standards for drinking water or non-potable standards for use as irrigation water. And it's a massively parallel project. There's 20 consultants involved, and that involved testing all the waters and figuring out water quality and what could and couldn't be produced, establishing joint agreements for the source water. And that's been the hang-up to date. There's a design team that's working on everything. We're almost at 10% design. There's one more facility that needs to get done. And then CEQA, that's the environmental impact report. And it's waiting on this to know what the project looks like. And then we've got the issue of the PUC schedule, because the Cal-Am project just got delayed 11 months. Well, this project is inextricably dovetailed with the Cal-Am project. So if they have a delay, do we have a delay? As of right now, we don't have a delay in front of the PUC, but by September 15th, we will be requesting one. And then, of course, we've got the Department of Public Health that has some work to do in parallel. So the joint agreements, everyone says you can't have a project if you don't have source water. Well, they're right. You have a dream, but if you don't have a commitment of water to treat, then you don't have water to deliver to the peninsula. And we've gone around and around with the agricultural community, the growers, really for close to 3 years. In the first 2 years, 2.5 years, showed almost no progress. And about 6 months ago, we finally kind of changed tack, opened it up to more the agricultural interests who really kind of are thought leaders. We spent a lot of time massaging the thinking of the County Water Resources Agency, and I believe we now have source water agreements that will be in place by the end of this week, if not next week. So that means this project can go forward. And then we'll file for PUC testimony changes, asking for an additional 11 months to match the Cal-Am desal project. So this is a lot of words on paper, but these source water agreements are basically going to give the peninsula the first priority on new water that's found. Wash water, storm water, tile drain water. It'll obligate the Pollution Control Agency to pursue additional sources on behalf of all parties. So both the irrigators in the growing area of the Salinas Valley as well as the potable water users on the peninsula. It'll reduce discharge to the bay by moving winter water into storage, making it available for irrigation in the summer. It's going to create reliability and security by diversifying our water options. That's what you want, is a variety, so that you're not over-reliant on one facility or source. It'll share the costs of these facilities between the peninsula and the growers. It's going to resolve some cost accounting concerns over at the Pollution Control Agency. There's what's called the Amendment 3, which is a huge stumbling block. It should solve that. And it begins to address the peninsula areas of special biological significance stormwater needs. So we can't continue to discharge stormwater into the National Marine Sanctuary because it's an area of special biological significance. So we're going to start by moving some stormwater into this facility. So it's a multi-benefit project. The peninsula really gains. The growers and the County Water Resources Agency gain because they continue to receive all the wastewater. They're no worse off than they are today. They will get expanded water to irrigate with, and they can fix a problem they have with the nitrate-laden discharges that sit there and affect sea otter health and the estuary health. And it combats the decline in water due to conservation. They've seen their source water drop 30% in the last decade. We're going to build a drought reserve so that we're going to have extra water in the ground available so that if we hit drought like we did this year, that we can turn up the production of water for the growers and take drought reserve out of the ground. So they win. The city of Salinas wins. They have these industrial ponds that they otherwise have to put $10 million into. And they need a revenue stream to support stormwater work and other work, which they'll get because they're going to lease the ponds to this operating group. They'll be able to reduce rates to their industrial customers. They'll be able to grow with low-cost improvements. And our friends in Marina Coast will get to monetize a pipeline that has gone unused because the project has changed. and they may be able to provide some of their wastewater on an interim basis in exchange for revenue. So when we talk multi-benefit, it's win, 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 and it's just taken us 3 years to get there. You know, I could just put this slide under every topic. So let's shift our attention to the cease and desist order. So in October of 2009, the order came in and said Cal-Am has to terminate their unlawful diversions by December 31st, 2016. Which, you know, when we say January 1st, 2017, it seems so much further away. No new service connections or increased use at existing connections, i.e. a moratorium. And it's really, really hurt New Monterey and Old Monterey and mixed-use projects because meters aren't getting set, even where we, the Water Management District, say there's no increased use of water. It's a very rigid interpretation of the CDO that Cal-Am uses. Meters aren't getting set. There's a schedule of reductions, which we can see graphically in a second. Aquifer storage and recovery can't be used to bank water year to year. It has to be used in the year in which the water comes off the river, which makes it less effective. It required a 500-acre-foot small project, which has already been done. That's the second phase of aquifer storage and recovery. There's reporting requirements. There's a piece of the cease and desist order that says any local project, if Pacific Grove goes out and creates 120 acre-feet or 500 acre-feet of found water, this section actually says it has to go against the unlawful diversions on the river, not to the benefit of the city to free water up to build a home and hotel or something like that. We feel that can be tested, but it's out there. And no relief unless you demonstrate at least a 13% reduction in demand and a moratorium has been implemented, which it has. And I think we've met the 13% as well. So the mandatory reductions basically are, there was an immediate reduction right after the order was put into place that had to happen, almost 550 acre-feet. And then there was an expectation of annual savings every year from fixing mains and implementing conservation and so forth. But the real end point by 2017 is that about 1/3 of the water that they were currently taking off the river in 2009. We're seeing graphically the bars here are legal sources of water, and the lines are the amount of demand we have here on the peninsula. And as you can see, we're okay right now, 2014. 2015, well, if we use as much water as we did in 2007, we have a problem. If we use as much water as we did in 2012, we don't have a problem. But we're somewhere in between. And why is that there? We'll talk about that in a second, but it's a step down in 2015 due to the seaside basin. So we think the Carmel River is our big problem, and the replacement of the unlawful diversions in the CDO is our big problem. It is. But our little problem, which happens a lot sooner, are these step downs in the seaside basin. So we're watching this very carefully. We don't want the seaside basin to be a trigger that forces us into rationing before we're ready to deal with rationing. So potential outcomes under the CDO, civil liability under the Water Code. The Water Code was set up for Farmer Jones and Farmer Smith shifting the outlet from the river from one field to the other field and then sneaking out at night and then shifting it back. And so it's set up to be about a $500 penalty per point of diversion per incident. It can be doubled for punitive reasons, so it'd be $1,000 per point of connection. Cal-Am's got 20 some odd points of connection. So it could actually get up there. It could be about $7 million a year of fines and penalties. California American made a proposal in their current general rate case to put what's called a memorandum account into place. So any fines and penalties would be tracked and then eventually put into the rate base for recovery through rates and charges. We, the Water Management District, oppose that and have filed a filing in opposition. There hasn't been a final decision on that particular item yet. Then they could refer it to the Attorney General for injunctive relief. They could retroactively include all the violations since Order 9510 was adopted to be punitive. But really, punitive fines and penalties aren't going to solve this problem. What's going to solve it is to have a water project that we can demonstrate and point to. They may ask for enforced mandatory conservation or rationing, and that's one of our fears here because we already do such a good job. There is an avenue for modification under the water code, and that's what we're working on right now. So again, the fear here is we've got a $2.3 billion hospitality industry with over 20,000 jobs, 8 million visitors, and that's the golden goose that we don't want to drive into kind of the death spiral, I guess, because it really affects all our jobs. Education is about $1.5 billion, I believe. Some of you officials would probably know better than I, but these are things that we cannot just let be regulated into drought. And you look at our water use per capita, we can't ration our way out of this because at 60 gallons per person, we are the lowest in the state. We've done our share. We've been doing it for 20 years. So what we're trying to do jointly is we've worked together with a California American, 4 of the cities, basically now representing all 6 of the cities, some local pumpers, the Steelhead Association, Sierra Club, ourselves, have made a proposal to the State Water Resources Control Board in April of 2014. We were supposed to hear back by August. Drought has all of their attention. We can't even get a meeting set until November, and talk about that in a second. But the proposal was, here's what we'll do to increase efficiency and conservation measures. Here's what we'll do to supplement water supply. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we'll continue to do to protect the resources of the river. So it's a proposal to say, give us 2 extra years, and we'll continue to do these things and fund these things, and we're acting in good faith. We've got a November 7th meeting in Sacramento to talk about it. And there's always basic legalese. The Water Management District sued the State Water Board over the cease and desist order. Cal-Am sued the State Water Board, and then a number of other parties joined in. In 2013, we we set aside that lawsuit, and we said we can reinstitute it at any time as long as there's enough time to address the cease and desist order. This is where we're getting to now. We're running out of time. So if the state does not come back with an acceptable counterproposal that would then lead to a hearing in, say, March or April, we as the Peninsula have to rethink going back into the courts because it's such a draconian order. So moving on, I mentioned Seaside Basin. We can't fall asleep on the Seaside Basin. So 2015 brings a loss or an adjudicated ramp down of 517 acre feet. Remember, total demand by the Peninsula is only about 12,000. So that's 1/24th of our consumption. And then in 2018, it brings another chunk. So now we've lost 1/12th of our total, roughly, maybe 1/13th. And in 2018, the Laguna Seca subarea goes to 0. Everybody know what the Laguna Seca subarea is? Hidden Hills and Bishop. So those big homes up in Pasadena or any of the Hidden Hills folks, up the hill, there's folks still trying to build homes. We may be facing a moratorium on new connections just like Ryan Ranch has. If you can't produce enough water in a localized subbasin, you shouldn't be able to build a new property. Cal-Am is seeking to interconnect all these systems so they can wheel water from one part of the Seaside Basin to another part of the Seaside Basin. And then eventually that interconnection would allow them to connect to the main system. So you wouldn't have these segregated satellite systems anymore. It would all be one big interconnected Cal-Am system. And then other projects, we are continuing to proceed with the Deepwater desal environmental and permitting work. They will hire their environmental impact team probably within 60 days. It probably won't take as long as the Cal-Am EIR is because they've done so many of their studies up front that they won't have a whole lot of modeling and study work to be done. So we're expectant that by the middle of next year, if not the third quarter of next year, the final EIR for Deepwater desal would be available. We have a study that we co-funded with the Soquel Creek Water District to see if deep water cost of water delivered is about approximately correct. And in fact, the draft says indeed it is, so that that water is looking to be delivered at the fence anywhere from $1,400 an acre foot to maybe $1,000 an acre foot less expensive than the Cal-Am project. Doesn't mean Cal-Am's obligated to go look at that, but it does mean that we on the peninsula will have a bit of a conundrum as we look at a project that's more expensive than another project and say, well, why are we stuck with that? Local projects, we're in our second round of funding development of local small projects, and the goal there, for example, City of Pacific Grove, if they can free up 120 acre feet that they use on their golf course, our goal is to put that water back into the hands of the jurisdictions so they can reallocate it and do more projects. And we're looking at replacing potable supply at the Del Monte golf course, some wells that were used for remediation at the airport that can now produce water for irrigation. So there's a bunch of little local projects, but 10 acre feet, 20 acre feet, 50 acre feet all add up and can create water availability to do some things while we're waiting for the big project to get finished. And that's all I have, but you know what? We should just, we'll leave it on that. So I'd be happy to take questions.
What if the deepwater desal proves to be the most effective, quickest way for us to get relief? Are you saying that we're legally bound not to use it? Are we able to use it?
Right. The basics of an investor-owned utilities franchise to serve says that they will take their project to the Public Utilities Commission, and if approved, it's their right to build their project. And so, not unlike the Carlsbad desal plant, where the San Diego County Water Authority said, this is going to be more expensive water today, but we're going to buy it because it's going to be cheaper in the long run. You can make uneconomic decisions. In this case, it's not necessarily an uneconomic decision with future benefit. It would simply be, that's your lot. That's what you get, because the regulated framework deals with the application of the applicant, California American Water. And if they get their approval, unless the judge were to open it up and say, well, wait, we think there's cheaper alternatives over here, which we don't know. We don't know if Deepwater is ever going to come together or if Peoples resurrects itself. But if there is an actual viable alternative that is cheaper, it lost its chance to be entered into this application setting through testimony because things have moved on. And so something else would have to happen. The project would have to collapse under litigation, or ease of connecting to an open water intake might get rid of some other issues. There might be reasons to look at it, but you could end up with a project that's 30% more expensive.
Dave, I know that you're on the firing line with so many of these parties and actually acting as a go-between. But the one that bothers me the most at this point is the State Water Resources Control Board. State Water Resources Control Board has perhaps accidentally, perhaps inadvertently torpedoed a number of our options. The Plan B was a Plan B that would use the power plant, Watts Landing Power Plant, water and brine disposal capability. They basically said no to that for complicated reasons, and then we went along and we're looking at a possibility of what would be the cheapest and fastest thing, an open water intake. Then they came up with some draft regulations that pretty much drive us into the ground in the Salinas Valley, which is totally impractical. How, in your dealing with them, do they realize the fact, their role in causing the delays, that now they want to crack the whip and pass along a big fine to us?
Yeah, yes, they do realize the very strange framework that they live in, because and what Roger alluded to is, for example, the California Energy Commission is okay with once-through cooling. And what once-through cooling is, you run water through the heat exchanger to keep power plants cooled down. and then that water just discharges out to the sea. And the idea with desal was to take that already heated water, run it through a reverse osmosis system, and use it for potable water. Other groups within the state, rightfully so from an environmental perspective, said once through cooling is horrible for marine life, we want to put an end to it. So you had two state agencies addressing an issue from opposite sides. In our case right now, we have the Public Utilities Commission, who is very, very focused on ratepayer impacts, who has been invited by name under a state water board policy that says coastal communities need to recycle their wastewater. Coastal communities need to reduce discharges to the ocean. And all of our sister agencies are supposed to help. Well, the sister agencies would be helping if they move projects like groundwater replenishment forward. But if it's $1 more expensive, you're going to have a sister agency saying, oh, well, we don't want that. But they should want that because it's mandated. It's a lower carbon footprint under the governor's AB 32. It's a lower carbon footprint. So there's things that the state wants over here that another piece of the state says, well, we don't want that because it has another unintended consequence. But do they recognize their culpability in slowing us down? Of course not.
Dave, I have 3 quick questions. One is, where do you stand on the Agency Act if some of the water we use for groundwater replenishment comes from Salinas instead of using our own water that we share with the Castroville project, number 1. Number 2, do you think PCA can go forward, MRW PCA can go forward with groundwater replenishment even if CalAm doesn't? What is the problem there? And number 3, could you explain 19.5, because this is it's mentioned so much. I think these people would love to know that issue with the Salinas growers.
All right, let's start with the last one first. So the hang up on the groundwater replenishment project was, as originally envisioned, there's all this wastewater in the winter that goes out to the ocean. And the agency said, let's become a zero discharge agency. Even before the concept of solving the Carmel River overdraft was thought of, it was, let's become a zero discharge agency. And the idea was to build a winter-only plant, maximize the use of wastewater, and the growers who currently get all the summer water said, oh, not so fast. This agreement over here says we get 19,500 acre-feet of water. You're only delivering to us 16,000 because conservation had really staunched the flow of wastewater. They said, so you need to give us that water. Well, they can't use it in the winter. There's no affordable storage that could be built and keep that water affordable, but it was a position. It was a bargaining position. And in fact, the Third Amendment does say you get 19,500. It also says the Peninsula gets 3,900. And the presumption was there was going to be 21,000 and vastly available supplies that just never materialized. The build-out and conservation practices resulted in actually less wastewater going to the plant than there was 7-8 years ago. But as a bargaining position, it was a good enough position to say it's ambiguous. We can't interpret this amendment. Your choices are either to negotiate or arbitrate. And folks never got quite to the arbitration stage. There was a lot of negotiation. We now think we're past it. The second question in there is, what about going forward with some form of groundwater replenishment, even if CalAm doesn't include it as a resource in their portfolio? And I think we have a difference of opinion between the Pollution Control Agency and our water district. You cannot sell potable water into the CalAm system unless the Public Utilities Commission says you can. And they will only say you can if it's economic to do so. And so heading down a path of building a project where you haven't proven the economics to the consumer or gotten the approval of the PUC is rife with danger unless you've got some other alternative use. And the only possible other alternative use would be recharging the seaside groundwater basin, which over time you would recharge it and you wouldn't continue to need the output from that plant, so you'd be building a plant that would have its own obsolescence plan. So I think it's a bit of a dangerous approach to say, it's a great project, we're going to build it. because you need to know that the water is going to reach the consumer. And I forgot your first question. The Agency Act. So the Agency Act is what created the County Water Resources Agency. In it are specific prohibitions. For example, Big Sur water cannot leave the Big Sur watershed. Garrapatta Creek, every watershed in the county from Garrapatta Creek south has restrictions on being delivered anywhere. And I believe that was to keep populated areas like ours perhaps from looking at those as potential sources. The Agency Act also says no groundwater produced in the Salinas Valley shall leave the Salinas Valley. And I can tell you that the doctrine of law in the state of California says wastewater belongs to the wastewater agency. Once it enters the interceptors and becomes part of the wastewater system, it's their water. So for someone to say that Salinas Industrial Pond water doesn't belong to the city of Salinas, they would be on the losing end of that battle. But it sounds like there are those who want to believe that, well, that originated in Salinas, it can't leave the Salinas Valley. I don't think that would withstand a test in the courts.
Sometimes I take a real divergent view on things, and I look at emergency situations. My first statement is not far off from where I think we might be headed in a few years if this drought becomes more severe. Was LWVWater involved in the rebuilding of the bridge or Rio Road in the floods of 95, 96?
Rio Road. You know, we were involved in all of the revegetation and the bank stabilization. You know, we did the, basically if you look at the river, it looks natural, but it's not. So we laid riprap and we covered it, we planted willows and cottonwoods. And
Okay, well, as I recall, because of the extreme emergency, the federal, the state, the county got together and they said, no permits, no environmental reports. And they went to a well-known, highly qualified bridge builder and they said, just build it.
Yep.
And they did it in less than 35 days. It would have taken 6 to 8 months.
Yep.
I'm projecting if this drought takes off, I think it's going to, everybody's going to step in and they're going to say, build it. And how long would it take without any permits, obstructions at all? The company was hired and you told to build this desal plant. How long would that take?
yeah, it'd still take about 2 years. I think groundwater replenishment, you know, we've talked about a little less than that, but yeah, the issues there, we actually looked under the drought situation, there was a waiver of a lot of CEQA work for immediate impact projects. And the immediacy of building a long-term water supply solution, it didn't cross or it didn't pass the immediacy test. So the suspension of CEQA, or environmental and permitting, for a long-term project is kind of unlikely.
Could you please discuss golf courses in this area? Are they metered? How much water do they use?
Yep.
What conservation efforts?
So there are only 2 golf courses that use potable water, and that's the Pacific Grove cache hole in the ground and the Del Monte golf course up at the Hyatt. All others are either on wells or use reclaimed water. And so all of the Pebble Beach golf courses use reclaimed water through the Carmel Area Wastewater District.
Are they metered?
They're metered, and they've actually voluntarily implemented conservation efforts because the flow of wastewater is down, the availability of water is down, because people are conserving, so they're putting less into their own drains at home. But if you go out, you know, Pebble Beach has a reputation for being super green everywhere. There are vast brown patches now, and that's not even Cal-Am potable water. So they have implemented quite a number of measures. Well, thank you very much for your time, everybody. It was great.